Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood, and joining me, he's back, Keith Raynor, Ultiworld senior editor. Keith, what's going on, my friends?
Oh, you know, not much. Just basically slept through my alarm this morning because I got up in the middle of the night. It's pretty standard stuff. Ate breakfast with Miles, trying to hold Miles. I'm becoming more and more skilled at doing things with one hand.
Multitasking with child in tow.
Football, hold him over here,
sure.
And then do something else over here. You know, it's this is great for our audio only listeners. But yeah, it's been an adventure, but we're here. We got coffee, much needed to kickstart the podcast.
I got the cold brew this morning.
That's right. Cold coffees too. It is hot.
It's hot. It's real hot. I played my first Summer League game last night in 100-degree weather. It was surprisingly not that terrible. I was expecting for it to be just awful, and we had to play in masks, okay? Don't get me started on that, but it was not as bad as I thought. We have on-the-fly subbing, 5-on-5 mini, if you want to call it mini. I don't know. Hybrid. And being able to sub out is real nice when it's 100 degrees outside. But 2-0 start for Team Blue. Let's go.
When it's really hot, but you get rid of the predominant sun beating down on you, it really feels a lot more manageable.
Yes, that's
I played my second Summer League game, and it was mid-90s or whatnot when we started, but our field was completely in the shade, so that just made it a lot more tolerable. Huge. Even though we were playing full field 7-on-7 with, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 subs between the two teams, but we made it.
Wow. Well,
and got my team's first win.
Hell yeah. And it's so great to be back out there. It's really just awesome to play again.
It's really fun.
Really fun.
It's a fun game, it turns out.
What a great game to play.
But it was really fun.
It's so fun. Well, I'm glad to have you back, Keith. I was lost in this world without you, so we have the stabilizing presence. We saw you a couple weeks ago for a brief segment. Just want to check in. It seems like everything's going great at home with Miles. Any just quick updates or insights? I know it's only been a few weeks.
We just had our a pediatrician visit for basically the 1 month ish mark, and he put on a lot of weight. He put on 33 ounces in 21 days, and she was average is an ounce a day. So he's a way above average eater right now, and it has not slowed down. It's great because it helps him sleep for longer periods of time during the night. So we get good 4-hour chunks of sleep, 2 4-hour chunks of sleep during the night. So we get almost a full night's sleep at this point. And that part's really good. But it means that he is just voracious for the rest of the day.
Hungry man.
Yes. Growing boy.
An ounce a day. That's pretty significant. I don't think I knew that.
I told my pediatrician that, to my knowledge, I believe I heard this fun fact, or I read it in a zoo book when I was a kid. Newborn blue whale can gain 10 pounds an hour.
Oh my God.
Take that to your trivia.
That's a great one to know. I bet I'll ask the trivia at some point. All right. Well, we have some stuff to talk about today. I'm excited to get back. I was at Disc Golf World Championships last week. Keith, have you seen the shot?
Not only have I seen the shot, I've been sharing the shot with non disc people because it is so remarkable, but also very translatable. Anybody can watch that shot and be amazed and understand that it was a big deal.
Yeah, you don't have to be a disc golf fan to get why that was amazing. I was 25, 30 feet from the basket, straight back from the fairway, and watched it go down. It was, I've talked about it a bunch on our disc golf podcast, the upshot. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen in sports. And I've been to a perfect game, and I've seen a no-hitter, and I've been to a lot of sporting events in my life, and this was it was a crazy, crazy moment. So anyway, check it out if you haven't seen it. James Conrad throwing it in from 250 feet on the 18th fairway to force a playoff and then win in the playoff. Amazing. But we're back and we're talking about some Ultimate today. First up, the Premier Ultimate League has announced their regional championship weekends, and they're going to have three-team weekends where the teams will come together and play each of the other teams round-robin style to determine the champions of each of these little sort of mini divisions. The East tournament was going to host DC Shadow, Raleigh Radiance, and New York Gridlock in New York City on August 14th and 15th. That same weekend, it will be Medellin Revo Pro coming up from Colombia, Austin Torch and Portland Rising playing up in Portland, Maine. And the Midwest tournament will take place 2 weeks later, featuring Columbus Pride, Indy Red, and the Milwaukee Monarchs playing in Milwaukee. The plan is for the league to stream all of these games, so keep an eye out for more information about that. The Atlanta Soul, Minnesota Strike, and Nashville Nightshade all opted out of competing in these regional tournament weekends this year. So,
I'm basically considering them the opt-out division. Maybe
who's going to be the opt-out champion?
Region? You know?
That's the question. I don't know how we determine it. You know, how hard are you opting out? You have to prove how much you want to opt out. So still unclear if there's going to be a wider, like, actual championship event for, you know, the teams that kind of win these regional weekends. It sounds, I mean, reading the tea leaves, it doesn't really feel like it, but I guess we'll see. That could happen at some point. I think the crossover.
I'm glad to know that there is the possibility.
Say it again.
I'm glad to know there's the possibility,
Agreed.
you know, that they're open to the idea that there may be additional competition, because my initial read on the situation prior to the announcement was that we should not expect that. And I'm still not necessarily sure that we should expect it, but it feels like they're open to the idea if it makes sense.
So this just, you know, this confirms what we sort of knew, that there were going to be these sort of mini tournament weekends. You know, we don't have a ton of details about them yet. I do know that the one in New York is going to be held in a stadium where people can come and watch. And so it's still going to be like a, you know, spectator focused kind of event. And so lots of questions still about scheduling and, you know, the two that are happening on the same weekend. I think they're going to try to avoid having a lot of overlap between games so that fans can watch all of the games and not feel like they have to pick and choose. So, I mean, great to see the PUL getting back on the field, if even in this very limited capacity. And, you know, we just got a roster from the New York Gridlock, Keith. And this team is looking real good. I mean, like, they're going to dominate this New York weekend, I think. Because fantastic
roster. And New York, I think we expected to be one of the best teams going into the previous season after their run to semifinal weekend and the additions that they had, and they've kept some of those. They made some more with this format of playing, you know, 1 day or potentially 2 days. That it makes it very accessible for folks in the area to join in.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like a who's who of strong East Coast players, from Philly to Boston, basically. So you've got your New York folks, Luisa Neves, Brittany Kaplan, plenty of others, but there. I mean, let's talk about some of the pickups here. Cammie Groom is going to be on the team. Angela Zhu is going to be on the team. I think I'm almost positive that some of these folks play. It's hard to remember the roster from 2019. I'm going to be honest, but you've got Linda Morse on the team. You've got Amy Zhu on the team. You've got, I mean, like, we could go through the whole roster. Lindsay McKenna's playing.
They added Raha Mozaffari.
Raha Mozaffari is playing. So, like, you're seriously, like, pick some of the best players in Philly, New York, Boston, surroundings, and put it all onto a team. Is this team, in a hypothetical matchup that may not happen, could this team compete to beat Revo for a championship?
I believe so. I think that this is the most talented competition we've seen for Revolution. I still would make Revolution the favorite if I'm just porting in the roster that we expected them to start 2020 with. That roster was incredible as well, but this is the most comparable roster that we've seen. I do think that Revo is a powerhouse, and for good reason. But this is a very impressive group with a lot of similarities, I think, in the type of pickups that they have, some of their strengths, and being able to disrupt that Revo game is something that the experienced women that they're adding to this team will be capable of implementing.
So we're still waiting to see rosters from other teams, and again, waiting on more details about these upcoming tournaments. But that's a look at what's going on in the PUL. Expecting some news about the Western Ultimate League and their return to play plan coming out maybe today. We're recording this Thursday morning, so keep an eye out for that as well. And we'll have more to come as we get a little bit closer to that and be able to talk about what these tournaments are going to mean. And I mean, I guess I'll ask you right now, Keith. Like, we've talked a little bit about this format. They're finding a way to get back on the field, but this does feel like a little bit like it's going to feel a little unfinished if this is all we get. We see the teams, we get a chance to take a look at them, but it's going to feel more like exhibition games as opposed to anything that sort of resembles a road to a championship. If we have 3 winners from 3 weekends, I don't know that that's going to be. I mean, then we'll just have to speculate about which of those teams would win in a round robin for the actual championship.
Time to bust out the simulation machine again.
Right.
I think calling it the PUL Championship Series is probably overstating it if there won't be some sort of climactic championship event. These are ostensibly showcase games. Much needed. Sure, but not. You need kind of like a through line, I feel like, to feel like a championship.
Sure.
And there's a definite lack of that. It's not like we'll be able to build narratives. There's no season. There's almost not even really a beginning and an end. It's kind of just like you're in the middle the whole time. So I think we want more, but at this point I'll take whatever I can get, because having Ultimate back has been really exciting, having games to watch, and it would be so awesome to be able to see these incredible players back on the field.
So let's turn our attention to the AUDL, which is now through 4 weeks of its season. I mean, some teams have already played half of their games. Detroit is 0-6. And so, Keith, I know you've had a chance to kind of watch some of the AUDL while you were away on paternity leave. And I guess here's a question I want to start with today. We have 3 undefeated teams left: Chicago, New York, and Atlanta. Obviously, of those 3, Atlanta is the big surprise to still be sitting undefeated and at the top of the Atlantic Division right now at 4-0. Which of these 3 teams is the best of the 3 from what you've seen this season?
Definitely Chicago. I think Chicago. I don't really have a lot of doubt about it. Now, it's a little difficult because we're operating with small samples, particularly because New York has only played 3 games. Like, it's wild to me. New York has played 3 games and Tampa Bay has played 6 games. Like, it's a little strange. But New York has played a little bit stronger competition. The opening night buzzer beater win against DC.
A game that has aged
Chicago
well.
has not played anybody, I think, to the caliber.
From what we've seen from DC.
Yes, exactly. I mean, DC could be the 3rd or 4th best team in the league. And Chicago, the best team they've played is 1 game against Madison. Otherwise, they've been able to work over
Minnesota.
Indy and Detroit. Or Minnesota, excuse me. I said Madison, but I meant Minnesota. They've been able to work over Detroit and Indy a couple times. But they're doing it with a piecemeal kind of roster. We've yet to see them at full strength, and they're waltzing through these games, I think. And given that New York has not looked particularly impressive in any of their wins, I would say I think there's a credible argument that Chicago is the front runner right now. I think that most people will be like, when New York's going to turn it on when they have to, they're going to get it together. We've only seen them in 3 games, and Chicago hasn't played anybody. I get all the arguments, and so would I flip them in the power rankings quite yet? No, but if I could get a gray line on Chicago's title odds right now, I'd feel pretty good taking them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge for Chicago is going to be playing nobody of substance until semis of the tournament in the playoffs. And can they ramp it up for that game when they haven't really had to ramp it up to beat the much worse teams in their division? Like Minnesota has not been as impressive as I thought they might be. I still think they're the team that's going to come out as the second playoff team out of the Central, but they're not as good as at least 3, if not 4 teams in the Atlantic. Like New York, Atlanta, DC, and probably Raleigh are all better than Minnesota. So the trial by fire that the teams are going to get in the Atlantic, I wonder if that's going to matter when it comes to playoff time. But you look at the roster for Chicago, and there's no question that this is going to be a great team. Whether they're the title favorite or not, well, certainly their odds have gone up in my mind, because I think we've seen from the teams out west, I don't really see any of those teams winning a title this year. I mean, Dallas is going to have to really turn it up for me to be a believer in that team. I know it was a back-to-back, and they lost, hurting us in the pick'em contest, Keith. We really just we were poor this past week. It was poor. But those are you have to. That's the game you have planned to win. You got to go on the road and play San Diego, and that game's going to be a big deal. And maybe that's a game that could decide who gets to host the playoff game, and you lose. And it was an exciting game. It was a close game. 2 solid teams,
but they got outplayed. They made a few too many
bad mistakes,
errors. Just
and at some
drops.
point, that goes from being early season rust to being this is who you are. And I just, for all the hype that Dallas had heading into the season, there's no way this is some kind of like untouchable juggernaut team that's going to be the best team in the history of the league. It's not even close. And I agree with what you say about New York. They've been good, but they haven't been untouchable. In fact, I think they maybe should be considered an underdog against DC coming up on the road. I will not be surprised in the slightest if DC wins that game. I think it's like a pick 'em. But DC is going to have the advantage of being at home, and I think that they're going to have a big crowd for that game, and that's a big game right there. So, I think we'll learn a lot about New York. If they go into DC and they disrupt that offense and they look good doing it, then I think we can be a lot more confident about what New York is. But, they snuck away with a win against DC early in the season, and then they've had 2 lackluster wins against bad opponents. A terrible Pittsburgh team that hasn't won a game, and a Tampa team on the road missing its best player, and with like almost a skeleton crew roster, and like they didn't convincingly beat them. So I think we have a lot of learning left to do about some of these teams, and we're going to start to see it happen this week when New York and DC meet.
Who would you favor in a head-to-head between DC and Atlanta?
Oh man, when do we get that game?
Neutral site game.
Neutral site. I personally still think DC is the slightly better team. I would say it's like DC -1.5.
They play a home and home in back-to-back Saturdays on the 10th and the 17th. So not this coming Saturday, but the following.
I mean, those games are going to be big for playoff positioning. And like, let's be honest, DC sitting at 3-1. If they beat New York, all of a sudden they're in a position to not only make the playoffs, but to like get the 1 seed. Like, that's not out of the question. And I mean, I know some folks are worried that like DC's peaking too soon, that they're playing too well too early, but I haven't really seen parts of their game that feel like they're just like getting crazy lucky or anything. Like they have a great offense that can beat you in multiple ways. And the defense is the question mark. The defense is for sure the question mark. And how are they going to play against a very good Atlanta offense? That is going to be the key. I mean, we could see a big time shootout between those two teams.
Time for Rowan to play D-line. I mean, everybody's been talking about his de-emphasized role on the offense. Let's get the guy on the D-line. Get him out there making a difference. But it's funny because it could go the other way for DC. I mean, I think DC, everybody's been very impressed, and rightfully so. I don't buy the peaking early. I think I'm with you that it looks pretty sustainable the way that they're playing. Maybe their throwing percentage has to go down a little bit, but when you watch them play, they're backing it up. They're making the right choices pretty much every time. But if they were to lose those games against Atlanta, suddenly they're opening the door for the teams that we thought might be fighting for those playoff spots in Raleigh and Boston. Otherwise, they could solidify a position, but they could just as easily lose it because of that loss to New York.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think that's what's exciting about this Atlantic Division is that, you still have good teams further down that are going to be able to try to take advantage. Now, here's the thing. I think we've seen the pecking order a little bit at this point. Like if I power rank these teams right now today, for me, it's until proven otherwise, New York, DC, Atlanta, Raleigh. Amazing that they're sitting in 4 right now, but that's where they're at right now, in my mind. And then Boston, Philly, Tampa Bay, Pittsburgh. Philly, I mean, Keith, we picked Philly to cover 3.5 on the road at Raleigh, and they were horrendous. I mean, awful. And I don't know what their whole roster situation was, but my God, they played one of the worst offensive games of the entire season. Stunk it up out there. And so I have absolutely I was already skeptical of this Philly team, and it was like, well, maybe we're going to learn something. And they're going to go down to Raleigh and prove something. No, they proved that they're bad. And it's time to say goodbye to their playoff chances because I don't think that there's any way they're going to beat anybody except the bottom dwellers in this division.
The back end of the Atlantic has been disappointing this year. I think part of the hype around this division was not only that the top was really good, but that the bottom was dangerous enough to beat you on your bad nights, and I'm starting to lose faith that that's true. Pittsburgh, Tampa, and Philadelphia have looked out of their depth. I
want to see Boston back at full strength, and I want to see how teams play when they have to travel up to Boston and play those road games. Boston goes 0-2 on their road trip down to Raleigh and DC, and they got thumped by DC, and they were competitive against Raleigh, and that was with missing some really important players from their roster. So when teams have to go travel with their thinner rosters up to Boston could get a couple of key wins. For me, it's 5 teams competing for 4 spots, and they're all pretty good. And there's Raleigh's already got 2 losses on the ledger. Boston has 3 losses on the ledger. So you can't get those games back. We'll see what Raleigh's able to do when they start getting out on the road a little bit more. And, I don't count this Boston team out, even though they're sitting with a losing record right now.
I guess you can't, given, the production that they're getting from Ben Sadok, who's just been a wonderkind for them. They're missing, some of the players I think we expected to lead the way for them. And they're still putting up great numbers. They're competitive, even though they've had a disappointing start to the year. I wonder, like you, what happens when they get all the pieces together. I think that they look like a first-year team in some ways. They look like they haven't quite figured out the pieces, how to maneuver people around the field. But the talent level is there, and that can make them really dangerous by the end of the year when they've had a bit of a chance to season the squad.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned Sadok. Let's talk about some of the players that you've been impressed by this season. And it's been awesome, with this new edge stat, which we've talked about here on the show. We're starting to get meaningful averages and be able to track who's having the biggest impact on the field, particularly offensively. Keith, who have you been impressed by so far?
A few players have stood out to me in just watching the tape And then looking over the numbers afterwards, and I'll give Ben Sadok his props because he's been awesome, but I knew Ben Sadok was going to be awesome, I would say. Some of the players who stood out to me, Ben Sadok's teammate, Henry Babcock, he looks really good. This is a versatile player who's a great offensive talent who has a really translatable game to me. I don't know that he's ever going to quite be like an all AUDL, all club level player, but he's like the perfect person to have on the line as the third or fourth guy next to those dudes. He just enables other players to play really well, and yeah, he's getting his. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he's near the top of the edge statistics for a reason. He's producing. Maybe he's not the highlight reel guy, but he's definitely someone who greases the wheels for an offense. I've been really impressed with him. Nate Goff from Chicago.
Oh yeah.
Obviously a great defender. He looks really like he's developed as an offensive player as well. Had the huge sky that had my jaw on the floor when I saw it in the
Boston.
game tape. And then I was so glad to see it take off, make SportsCenter. I mean, it was a posterizing grab. Just an incredible play by Nate Goff.
Defender has to just resign. That's it. It's done.
Yeah, and he helped him up.
Good to see you.
I wish we had the time to like go in and edit that video to have like the internal narrative of the defender. That moment when Nate Goff extends his hand to help you up, you could see the conflict of like, the last thing I want is your help right now, and like I also don't want to be a jerk, and like you're being a nice guy.
Man.
Oh, that's tough. That's tough look. But Goff has looked really good, and in a way that doesn't actually always show up on the stat sheet. Although I think he may still be. Going into that game against Indy, I think he was their leader in goals, even though he's on the D-line. And that's because their defense is out there so much. But he looks like very polished offensively in a way that I wouldn't have said about him after the 2019 club season. So I've been very impressed with Goff as well.
I want to shout out. I mean, John Stubbs has been awesome in 2 games for Atlanta. His last game was excellent. Jordan Kerr, rookie to the league. Out of BYU, playing for San Jose. San Jose is not a great team, but he has been excellent. He's 5th in edge per game with 4 games on the ledger, averaging almost 500 yards of offense, 2.5 goals, 2.8 goals, 2.5 assists, 1.5 blocks. Just such a versatile player. I'm not surprised to see his skills translate to the bigger field, but I did have questions about what he was going to look like, going from the college scene up into club and pro, and it's a very promising start for Jordan Kerr. Ryan Osgar has been so good for New York. I think the bright spot for that team.
Osgar's been really good, but the player that's shocked me is Elliot Chartok.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, we knew Oscar was one of the best players in the men's competition. Like we already knew that.
I am still a little skeptical of Chartok. He's piling up the yardage. I mean, he's high use Chandler on the offense, but a little too many turns for my taste. We'll see how it goes as we get into the bigger games later in the season.
Gotcha. Jury's out for you on Chartok.
Jury's out. Not that I don't think he's a talented player. He certainly is. But, getting a lot of yardage, throwing to Yacht and Williams and Osgar, like that's not necessarily something that's super impressive to me. I mean, I just want to see him clean it up a little bit. Averaging 3 turns a game which is what he's doing right now, is a little too much. And so let's see how it goes when the pressure gets bigger and we see them against the best teams in the Atlantic. Who else has been really good?
How about Johnny Malks?
Yeah, I mean, so many of those DC guys. I mean, DC, yes. Mind. Zach Norbaum has been playing out of his mind.
He's great.
Out of his mind.
What a combo.
Yeah, it is an awesome combo. And we'll see if that keeps it up. Because, I mean, Zach Norbaum is just... He's averaging 524 yards a game, 4 goals, 3.5 assists, only half a turnover per game. And there's maybe an argument that there's been a couple of turns that haven't been assigned to him, but he is number 1 right now in edge per game, 5.4. Like elite, all-star, all AUDL type performance through a couple games to start the year. So we'll see if that keeps going, but man, has he been impressive.
Let me give you an off the radar shout out here. And you can make all the good player, bad team jokes that you want. If I had said there's somebody from Pittsburgh who's going to be tearing it up this year, who no one's going to be talking about, I don't think the person you would have thought I was going to say is CJ Colicchio.
Yeah, I mean, it was Max Shepard or bust.
Right. Maybe you're like, okay, there's room for Sam Van Dusen or whatnot, right? Sure. To have a breakout year or something. Colicchio, I think it's his first year on the team, and he's looked like the real deal as a receiver for them. You know, he's been a big part of their offense. So, Pittsburgh, super disappointing year. Can't break those eggs any other way. But he's been pretty good.
How about any of these Austin guys? You know, Austin out here is like surprisingly competitive. They're now sitting at 2-2. And so maybe we'll just see them slide off the radar. But like, there's some name. I feel like I need to pay more attention to what's going on in Austin, because they got a bunch of guys I've never heard of. Huh?
It's been a group effort, I think. But
that's true.
I think a bunch of players like DC are outperforming what we would have thought. Obviously, they just had a disappointing back-to-back this past weekend. But Vinay Valsaraj, Shane Heath, Jake Sames, Evan Switek. This is a player I do not know. I know the name. I know his family name from seeing other players, but not from seeing him play.
Yeah. And Broadbeck, he's been really good. Interesting team. And we'll see. I mean, it's cool to see a team come out with a bunch of players we've never heard of and be competitive. All right. Well, we're gonna take a break right here. And we're going to turn to an interview with Tulsa Douglas of, New York Gridlock, as well as Boston Brute Squad. And we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming club season and how things are going in Boston, what's going on with Brute Squad, coming off their national championship win in 2019. And we're going to also try to get some perspective from Tulsa on her thoughts on fact that, the Pro Elite Challenge, we just got the news, there's not going to be a women's division this year because there weren't enough teams signing up. And it looks like the U.S. Open may also not have a women's division. So I think it's been a topic of conversation since the news came out about this. People have been discussing the Triple Crown Tour and its impact on the women's division. What it means that we're seeing teams not choosing to compete at some of these events earlier in the year. And so we're going to talk to Tulsa Douglas about it all next. You're listening to Deep Look. Well, for the first time this season, we went 0-3 for picks in our contest with Stall 7. Taking Philly was just abysmal. Dallas losing to San Diego. And hey, Detroit covering the spread against Madison. So congrats to those teams, although I don't know if Detroit deserves much in the way of congratulations. This week's lines: New York, a pick'em at DC. Madison -2.5 on the road in Indianapolis. And Seattle taking on Austin in Texas. Austin, a 1.5 point favorite in that game. Here are our picks this week on Deep Look. We're going with DC to get the home win against the Empire, avenging a loss earlier this season. Really like the form that DC's been in. This is a big game for them, and it's tough to go on the road and get a win. And this DC team, I mean, this is a bit of a spicy pick though, because DC has pretty historically lost to New York in all of the big spots. But I think we saw from this DC team that they're going to be able to adjust and take New York out of their comfort zone and get a close win. We're also going to take Madison to cover the 2.5 point spread at Indianapolis. I mean, so much depends on the roster that Madison sends, but they know that this is a must-win kind of a game, and I think they're the better team. They have a good defense that should be able to handle Rick Gross and Travis Carpenter, and so we're taking Madison -2.5. And finally, we are going to take Austin to get the home win. Generally, just liking home teams this season. I think it's difficult for Seattle to go on the road, get that win at Austin, so we're going to take Austin to get back to 500 and cover the 1.5 point spread. So those are our picks this week on Deep Look. We'll see how it goes. Joining us now on Deep Look is Tulsa Douglas, who will be competing later this summer for the New York Gridlock in the PUL, as well as Boston Brute Squad, and is a co-host of a new Ultimate podcast, which you got to check out. It's called Share the Air. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, interview focused with members of the community and kind of focused on who they are as people, not just as players or members of the Ultimate community. Tulsa, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. First of all, how are you? We haven't had a chance to talk to that many players. It's obviously been this long hiatus coming out of the pandemic, and just want to hear a little bit about how things are going for you as you start to hopefully reemerge and be able to play again. Yeah.
I'm doing well. I'm excited. I have gotten to go to a couple of Gridlock practices, and Brute stuff is starting to get rolling. So I'm feeling hopeful that I'm going to have 2 good Ultimate seasons with 2 different teams. So I'm excited about that.
What's it been like preparing for 2 different seasons at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's unique, especially because there's more overlap with both of the seasons this year. So it's been like kind of balancing, thinking about strategy for one team, which has like a whole different roster of people than the other team. But it's cool because I play 2 different roles on those teams. So for Gridlock, I'm a captain, and we have a whole coaching staff with 4 different people, and like the whole system kind of runs differently because it's the semi-pro. And then for Brute, it's got like the, club structure, where it's mostly run by players. So it's nice to get to do both parts and have a role in both parts.
Well, we were talking about the Gridlock roster, which was just released, which is very impressive. Some big pickups and a team that looks like it could be competing in a normal season for winning a title. How have practices been? I mean, I know people are still knocking off the rust, but there's a lot of really good players on the team. I'm sure as a captain, you're excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to play with a lot of different people. I think that's there are a lot of things I like about Gridlock, but one of my favorite parts is like we have people from, I don't know, probably 10 different club teams that come together to play on this team. So the benefit of that is like everyone has so much knowledge and so much background. The challenge is that everyone is used to their own systems on their club team being like, one of the top players on their club team. So I think it's been fun to try and piece together like, oh, this is something you really like doing. This is one of your strengths. How can we make this work for you? And like piece together on our O-line, who does what and how we can be the best team.
Your club team also typically has an incredibly talented roster and has had a lot of success, but we haven't seen the roster yet. Where is Brute Squad at in the process of their season?
Yeah, I think I can say this. We have internally set a roster, and I think it's going to be released publicly soon. Yeah.
Awesome.
If you want to break the news, we're here,
I did not run that by the rest of the team.
What I've heard through the grapevine that Brute Squad is lower commitment this year. Is that true, and what does that mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as lower commitment. I would say the season is shorter and more condensed. So things are starting later, definitely. And, I think there are many reasons for that. But going into September and October, it will be basically the same level of commitment. And we're asking everyone to be the same level of like working hard at practice, dedicated, working hard outside of practice. So I think the main difference is like the season is shorter and we're going to try and do a lot in a shorter period of time. We're not going to as many early season tournaments. So our first travel tournament will be Pro Champs in September. So it's not less commitment. It's just shorter commitment. I don't know. I want to make sure that it's like, and we've had to clarify this for the team. It's not like we're doing less. It's just we're doing it in a shorter period of time.
What are your expectations for this club season? I think the sense, and it seems like you and the team have it as well, is that it's a different year from what we're used to.
Yeah. Personally, we don't have to include this, but personally, I don't love expectations because it means like you're expecting certain things to happen. I think we have goals for the season, and there are a few parts. One, like I talked about, it's a shorter season, so we're condensing a lot more. So we're figuring out how to onboard new players and get our systems up and running in a shorter period of time with fewer practices. We're also using a bunch of the work we've done in the off season to kind of figure out how we restructure and look back at the way we've ran the team in previous years and try and figure out things that we can change to make the team more accessible, more inclusive, more equitable, those kinds of things. So I think for us, it's kind of like two-part goal. We want to perform and be the best team we can possibly be on the field. And we also want to make sure we're thinking critically about how we can improve as a team in general.
What drove the decision to avoid travel tournaments until pro championships?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think there are a few reasons. One is we were slower getting started in terms of like organizing for this season. And I think there are a few pieces in that. A big part of it was we didn't know if the season was going to happen. We didn't know if it was safe to play and if we felt like it was reasonable and like smart to play, and whether our time and energy should be going somewhere else. Another piece is that I think there's a bunch of overlap with the PUL and with our roster. And I don't know if that happens with other teams, but I was trying to calculate in my head. And I think over half of the Brute roster is on some PUL team. And so that means, PUL championships are happening in August. Last season, they happened in June. So there's a lot more overlap in sharing weekends between PUL and club teams. And then I think there's also a piece of it where it's like, we had a year where we got to do a lot of other fun stuff on our weekends, and maybe people are wanting to have some of that time. And then there's also the saving money piece, and to commit to going to, say, like Pro Elite in Colorado when we have just set our roster and haven't had any practices. It's like a big investment in money to go play somewhere else when we could either be practicing just with ourselves or playing some local tournament.
We're seeing right now with Pro Elite Challenge, we're seeing that the women's division has been canceled. We know that that's possible for the U.S. Open. We've seen that there may be some established women's clubs teams that don't compete during this year or compete in a very limited capacity, and to a greater extent than what we're seeing in the men's division and to some degree in the mixed division. From your perspective, what do you think has led to those differences in the women's division in particular?
Yeah, I think some of it may be kind of the things that Brute has come upon too. Higher roster turnover, lower start planning for the season, more of the PUL crossover. And maybe a piece of it that compares with like PUL and AUDL there is that, I don't know, there's more men's players to dip into if there's less crossover between those two rosters versus like women's. I don't know, there's just like fewer players in general. And this may be far out there, but like I've been talking with some people about this, and one theory is like women's teams just weren't planning because we weren't sure if it was going to be safe. And maybe there's a piece around like men's teams were more ready to push that limit there. And maybe there's more like identity tied up in being an ultimate player and an athlete. And so like pushing for the ultimate season to happen earlier was happening by men's teams more than women's teams. I'm not quite sure.
Something that we haven't dealt with too much yet is kind of the PUL crossing over with the club season. Obviously, there's only been one season so far, and it mostly avoided the club season. And now we have this year where it's definitely taking some weekends during the club regular season, but it's still kind of limited in its crossover. In the future, and I guess, you can speak for yourself here. I don't expect you to answer for everybody else, but in your mind, if the PUL was to happen, let's say, from April to July or early August, something much like we've seen in the AUDL, do you feel like you would want to prioritize one over the other based on your experiences so far?
No, I don't think so. I think I personally get different things out of the different experiences. And I think I like to think that each team, like my team Gridlock, gets a lot out of me playing on my club team, and same with all of the other Gridlock people that play on their club teams, and vice versa. My club team gets a lot out of me kind of having a different role on my pro team. So no, I do think that if that were the schedule in future years, there would have to be some like shifting of the way both teams do things.
One of the things that's come up a bunch since this news about the Pro Elite Challenge canceling the women's division has been about the Triple Crown Tour. Kayla Emmerich had a lot of thoughts that she shared on Twitter, and it's been conversation on social media about, TCT, what should the requirements be? Brute Squad is a team that is typically finishing in the top 4 and therefore has more requirements than a lot of other teams in terms of you got to go to the US Open. You have to attend more events than some other teams. Where do you stand on that? Like, is it nice to not have to go to Pro Elite Challenge this year in the middle of July? Or do you think like in future seasons, you'll be excited to go back to an event like that to kick off your year?
I think the biggest piece is that we're going to save a lot of money. So the season for individuals is going to cost a lot less this year. And that's exciting personally. And I also hope that it would make this season potentially more accessible for some people. That's saying that, like, I imagine we're going to go right back into TCT next year. So it's not like somebody would be able to play this year and then what would happen next year. I do think there's a difference in kind of planning. So typically we know a season ends in October and we can guess when the TCT dates are going to be for the next season. And so if you're thinking about playing Brute Squad again the next year, you kind of can pencil in those dates into your calendar. And I think this year, maybe a difference was we didn't know whether, maybe USAU said they were happening, but we didn't know if we were going to be going. And so it was kind of a question of like, are we having a season? Will we be going? Do we plan other stuff for those dates or do we keep them open?
It's funny. I was listening to your Share Their episode with Suzanne Fields, and she talked about how when they first started the women's division, like they literally were in a room, raising their hand and be like, okay, hey, we're going to host this tournament. Would anybody come to that? And captains from other teams would stand up and be like, I would go to that. And that's how they would design the schedule. And now we're at the point where it's like, some teams have this predetermined schedule based on your finish from last year. Like the community has changed a lot. I almost wonder if it would be better. Like we have all these online tools. Maybe we can go to doing a big town hall where people are like, I want to host a tournament in this region. Does anybody want to come to that? And teams just say yes. I don't know if that would be better. Maybe that's the replacement for Triple Crown Tour. But I digress. I think that the Triple Crown Tour itself, I feel like has long potentially been criticized for how it impacts the women's division compared to the mixed and men's divisions. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of people speak to is not only the cost of the travel for the elite teams, but the lack of access those elite teams have to more local regional level teams that are newer or want to grow into more competitive teams. Is that an effect that you've noticed in your career?
Well, I'll just say, like, when I wasn't on Brute Squad yet and I played for Siege, one of my favorite things was getting to play Brute Squad, and we played them at regionals and at Boston Invite when Brute used to go to Boston Invite. And I think as somebody on one of those teams, like trying to get to nationals, trying to play the best teams, it was really valuable to get like crushed by Brute Squad. So I think that is one benefit of encouraging the top teams to play at more local tournaments. Did I answer the question? Can you ask it again?
No, I think you've kind of gone to it, especially as somebody who's been on both sides of that. You've been both the player on the team looking to compete against the top teams, and now you've had experience as a top player who doesn't have that same access to those teams. I mean, do you think that hurts the division, not getting to play against Siege or other teams of equivalent goals at this point in your career?
I don't know if I can answer whether it hurts the division. I think it probably, I can speak as somebody who on a team that wasn't qualifying for nationals, as a player who wanted to improve and get better, I saw a way to improve and get better was to play against the best people and play against people who are better than me. And that I don't imagine for it doesn't make the funnest games for everyone. Like, for people who just get crushed, maybe it's not that fun. And for the team that's just crushing a team 15-0, maybe it's not that fun. But for maybe the teams in the middle where it's like you get a few points, you do some good stuff, you get excited about it, you get a D on somebody great. I think that's beneficial.
So, from your side of things, like what are you hoping to do in your career? You're still a young player, a lot of potential in front of you. You don't feel young, but like what are some goals that you have? You've won at kind of all levels at this point. So, where do you want to go as we start to ramp back up towards full on competitive ultimate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been thinking about it too. It's like, why do I do what I do? And why do I spend so much time and energy doing it? And I think there's a piece for me where obviously I want to be the best player. I want to keep improving as a player and keep having an impact on the field. And I also think for me, I really value strong leaders and leaders who help bring everyone into a team and help everyone improve and grow. So I think that's something I got a lot of in college, and that kind of like hooked me in continuing to lead and play on teams. So I think long term in my career, like, if somebody asks me what do I want to be known for, I think, I want to be a great player, and I also want to be known for being somebody who's helped lead teams to success and enjoyable places for everyone to play on.
Any just kind of final thoughts on playing this season? Like how do you prepare, I guess, with Brute Squad to play where you don't have that kind of natural progression of intensity ramping up over Pro Elite, US Open, Pro Championships, Regionals, Nationals, with it condensed, like you said? How do you get ready for, Nationals, where all of a sudden it's like all the pressure's there and everybody's trying to like ramp up right at the last, 6 weeks of the season?
Yeah, I think for us, everyone on Brute Squad is really competitive and wants to be the best. And I think that mentality comes from the beginning. So we're not really ramping up like our want to win and our intensity and how hard we work over the course of the season. I think more we're fine tuning the way we do things, people's roles, strategy, that kind of thing. So, and I think the benefit of this year is that people haven't been playing as much as they wanted to in the past year and a half. So people are coming in with like excitement to play, excitement to be back together. So I'm not quite worried about like the motivation and the drive and the effort. I think it's going to be more about how we bring together a team that, like you said, has had some more roster turnover than in previous years. And how do we get everyone on the same page and kind of figure out all of those things quickly without a lot of tournaments, without a lot of high level competition. So I don't know quite yet. We'll see.
Yeah. Is Brute Squad playing some local tournaments before Pro Champs?
Yeah, I think we're planning to play Boston Invite, but like you were saying, Keith, like we're talking with the other teams because there's only 3 other teams registered. So at this time, we're going to try and like hopefully make it a one-day thing or see what we can do to get some games in locally. But it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been asking this question, like, are you worried at all about the state of the women's division overall because of the thin signups we've seen to start this year? Or do you think this is just a blip that's kind of like a post-pandemic thing and that we'll see, robust numbers going forward?
Yeah, I think time will tell. I think I am paying attention to it because I think it's dangerous not to. I mean, it could all work out and that's great. What I'm worried about is I'm worried it reflects kind of women's ultimate across different levels, youth, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I'm not quite sure why it's happening, but I do think that like organizers, people running teams, volunteers, I think personally, people who play in the men's division should be paying attention to teams in their area and figuring out like, okay, my team is playing, my team already has all this organized. Is there a way we can support and make sure that our counterpart women's team or women in the area have similar opportunities?
Awesome. Well, what are you looking forward to most this season in the broad sense of the next 6 months?
I think my first brute practice is going to be fun. I think my first brute tournament where we're all together is going to be great. I think I'm looking forward to our Gridlock showcase game against Portland in August. I don't know, a lot of playing.
Awesome. Well, I mentioned at the beginning your new podcast. You want to give a quick elevator pitch to those who might want to subscribe?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I tell people about it is each episode kind of brings a different story and a different person's perspective and different experiences. And it's kind of like you're getting a little window into different parts of the Ultimate community with each episode. And you don't have to like want to hear about Ultimate strategy and Ultimate games and everything. It's kind of more about the person and their story. And yes, each person is tied to Ultimate, but I like to think we're getting at larger topics and things that apply to more people's lives.
It's called Share the Air. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Tulsa Douglas, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great season.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Great to have Tulsa on the show. And, as we discussed with her a bit, the Pro League Challenge will not have a women's division this year. And right now, it looks like the U.S. Open is not going to have a mixed or a women's division. That could still change, but based on, I think there's 2 mixed teams signed up and 1 women's team, something like that. So definitely not looking likely. And Keith, I'm curious for your thoughts on that. We heard from Tulsa. Are you concerned about this as in, sort of what it means for Club Ultimate and particularly the women's division? Or, do you see this as more just a byproduct of coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I'm concerned. And I think I've raised some of these concerns previously on the show, mostly as it pertains to like college and youth. I guess I didn't realize that it would also kind of infect club, where I think it might be a bit more isolated. I think it's kind of a confluence of multiple different factors, as kind of Tulsa was speaking to. The AUDL pushing forward and the Premier Ultimate League and Western Ultimate League not doing the same, I think really galvanized a lot of organization for men's teams and pushed a lot of players to start playing. And, then you turn around and you're like, okay, I'm training for Ultimate. Like, what's my club team doing? All these people are playing. Like, it just creates kind of a culture of like, we're going. And I don't think that existed necessarily in the women's division. And that's just part of it. We've talked about, the propensity for men to be more risk tolerant and how that might affect their decision making in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's so many different potential factors that are involved in this. Tulsa even spoke to people finding things that they wanted to do outside of Ultimate and being like, I'm okay not playing Ultimate this year. And she put forth the kind of idea that there may be a lot of men's players have their identity more tied around Ultimate and didn't find those other things that would fill that void. So there's a lot of possible answers, and my guess is it's going to be some odd combination of them that's led to where we're at now. I think that the club division is more resilient in the long term. Like, I think we've had some concerns about the numbers in the participation in the women's division, and the thread from Kayla Emmerich kind of enumerates some of the potential problems that have happened with the Triple Crown Tour. And, if this issue this year, if the lack of visibility that we're going to see for the women's division hurts the division in the long term, combined with the Triple Crown Tour hurting participation, like that, I think is the bad recipe that could lead to detrimental performance for the women's division in the long term. But so I am concerned, if this is a trend, if we get to the college season and we see the same thing, if we see college participation is down in the fall, if we see college participation extends down in the spring, if we see that youth teams are which we're already starting to hear, are having trouble maintaining their presence, like what's to stop women's division participation from just starting to decline? That is my greater concern.
100%. And I mean, I think specifically what I'm going to be looking at is overall membership. Are we going to see adult memberships go down? Are we going to see women's memberships go down? That is going to be something that I look for. Because here's the thing. For the concerns about the women's division, I think we've seen over the past few years is more consolidation. More players kind of congregating onto top teams, and actually, and also more women playing mixed. Mixed has been growing fast. Mixed has been the biggest and fastest growing division for some time. And I mean, I think there's arguments to be made that, you know, it'd be better to see a stronger women's division. But like, if people are playing Ultimate and they're happy and they're enjoying themselves, whichever club division they decide to compete in, I think that's great at the end of the day. So if you're seeing women's memberships continue to go up, but we're seeing women's division participation going down, obviously that means more women are choosing to play mixed. And, you know, again, you can discuss whether that's good or bad, but it's people playing Ultimate, which I think has got to be the goal. So I think I was more worried 2 months ago when there were rumors that Fury wasn't going to play and that Riot wasn't going to play and that Brute wasn't going to play. And now all of those teams have announced tryouts and are having a season. Now, they're not playing as much as Tulsa spoke to, but if you're just getting your tryouts going in June, why on earth do you want to try to go to Pro Elite Challenge? I mean, it's an irrational choice to some extent. Like, it's great that there's some teams that are like, hey, I want to fly out there and do it. You know, Sockeye and Pony are doing that in the men's division. They're flying all the way out there, and that's great. I mean, that the USA Ultimate is creating this playing opportunity as they should. And I am feeling a little bit less concerned now that I know that teams are going to play, that we're going to have probably a very competitive and awesome national championships. And I do think that to some extent, this is both people being, there have been teams that don't want to go and have to play these expensive Triple Crown Tour events, number one. And number two, people are starting later, pretty much across the board. So I think, you know, US Open, for example, it's expensive to go to Minneapolis that weekend. It just is. It's expensive to fly there. Rental cars are crazy right now. It's a 3-day tournament, although they now cut it down to 2 days. And so teams are just saying, I don't want to do that. But then you've got AMP hosting Philly Invite, which is going to be extremely competitive and probably look like the US Open field, but just in Philadelphia later in August. So is the fact that those teams are going to compete at a non-TCT event really that different than if they played at the US Open? I mean, obviously, USA Ultimate would probably prefer that they all come to the US Open. But I think this is showing some of the cracks in the TCT, things that people have been a little bit dissatisfied with in general. And, you know, it's clear it's 3 years overdue to make some like substantive changes to the TCT. That's really what I come down to. Like, I thought we were going to get big changes last year, and then they basically just tinkered at the edges again. And I think we need to stop tinkering at the edges, and we need to have like a full on, like, do a big survey and like have some meetings where you really think about how can we make this a better fit for teams? How do we increase the flexibility without losing the competitive crossover play that is necessary to have good rankings and like a meaningful season? But there's a lot of things on the table that you could try that might make a real difference. Giving bids to teams, giving nationals bids to teams that win TCT tournaments, opening up the options for teams to play at various, what I've called tier 1 tournaments. So you make a bunch of regional tournaments tier 1, and then you tell teams they have to play at least 1 or 2 tier 1 events. You can still have US Open as the tent pole, but you start to increase the flexibility elsewhere. Like, how many times do we really need to watch skeleton teams that aren't even full set rosters compete at the Pro Elite Challenge. It's not a good way to start the season. It just isn't. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have a tournament in Colorado at that time of year, but like, don't force teams to go to it. I think let teams be a little bit more choosy, and I think everyone's going to end up happier. And I think you're going to also increase participation. That's the other thing. Like, obviously, lower level teams already have more options, but bringing back the regional level of competition where people are going to Boston Invite again, that to me sounds great. That's like a good part of the community, and it helps people feel like they're a part of something. But I will say, after this said, I am concerned that there is just going to be decreased participation almost across the board. My summer league is probably 33% smaller this summer than it was 2 years ago. And I mean, obviously there could be a million reasons for that, but I know some people are just like, I'm not ready to play yet. I'm out of shape. I'm going to wait and play in the fall. That makes sense. But that's just a snapshot in, Manhattan. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to extend out to the entire country, but I do think we have to be focusing on, okay, we've had participation drop off because of the pandemic. How do we now move forward to try to build that base back up and get the growth, being at the 10 to 20% range and not the like 1 to 2% range?
In physics, isn't it that it takes the most energy to go from complete stop to moving, right? Like, isn't that how that works? More than it does to continue to accelerate. Like, that's what we're running into, I think, is we basically came to a complete stop, and how do we get started again? And right now, it feels like in the men's division, the wheels are turning, and the women's division fell a little bit behind. And if that, beyond just club, if we don't have that kind of momentum for recruiting women and women matching players into the ultimate pipeline, like, is that going to hurt the community as a whole? And I think that's my like summarized concern.
Well, it's interesting. Again, I do think it's very encouraging that basically most club teams have said, yes, we're playing. And that may mean that they're not playing until sectionals, but I think in this year, that's totally understandable. So we'll see what it looks like by the end of the year. What do memberships look like? Are people out there playing, having a good time? Really, that's the goal, right? You can't force people to play Ultimate Frisbee.
I'm pretty sure that this problem could be solved by Ultibucks, though. So we really needed Ultibucks. Can you just give a quick? Can we hire a lobbyist?
Can we give a quick synopsis of Ultibucks for those who are just tuning in or forgotten what the heck that is?
Ultibucks is a show meme, an Ultiworld Discord meme that's like increasingly real. Basically, the idea that there's like an alternative currency in Ultimate that we use to incentivize behaviors that are good for the community as a whole, and that teams could use to get into tournaments or things like that. So, you'd have to pay Ultibucks to get into nationals, and you could earn Ultibucks by being an observer or running a clinic or coaching a youth team, whatever, the kind of things that we think the community benefits from. We can incentivize those and then require those Ultibucks, or the Ultibucks can even be used for additional benefits elsewhere, for other tools. But basically creating our own economy in Ultimate with our own currency.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the way that nationals goes, right? They have the team fee, and then everybody has to pay a player fee. Imagine if you could subsidize or completely get your player fee covered if you coached, ran clinics, volunteered at other events. This is a system that we've seen work, like in many, not necessarily like an Ultibucks currency type idea, but there was somebody in the Discord who was like, didn't get in through the lottery into League. And they said, I kind of brought it on myself because I didn't, was it volunteer? I think it was volunteer. I didn't volunteer to help out with this thing earlier, which I could have done. And that would have moved me up the priority list to get into the league. And that's basically Ultibucks in action. So having a national system of something like this actually makes a ton of sense, because I think one of the challenges that we face in Ultimate is that you have an extremely small number of people who are almost exclusively not compensated well or even at all, doing the majority of the organizational work that is required to have an infrastructure for competition and people playing Ultimate. So I'm not really talking about USA Ultimate here. I'm talking about local people. Now, yes, there are a couple paid people in most big cities these days who work for the local disc organization, which we should be encouraging. This is very good. Having paid staff makes a huge difference in this organizational capacity. But you think about the tournament directors, you think about the observers, all these people who help things run, they're basically not paid, they're burning out, and we have no way of giving them any sort of realistic compensation. So how do we change that? Maybe you shift it from dollars to Ultibucks, and you create opportunities for them to get, whether it's free admission to tournaments, free tickets to go to nationals. You can do raffles where you do an all expenses paid trip to go to club nationals with VIP tickets, and they put you up in the hotel and everything, and you can pay your Ultibucks into the raffle. Like, there's a lot of ways that we can create more like robust economy for the organizational work that we need, and that we need more than ever right now, especially as we've had people drift away because of the pandemic, or they're burned out, or they've moved on with their life, or whatever else.
It's a fun way to redistribute the actual money, because if you give teams like free admission to tournaments or whatnot, somebody's footing that bill, right? Like, someone's paying.
Well, right, but I think USA Ultimate takes that as a line item in their budget.
Right. So I'm pro Ultibucks. Like, if you're listening to this and you want to be our Ultibucks lobbyist, we'll start sending you to USAU meetings to lobby for Ultibucks.
I just think there's crazy ROI potential here. You give a couple teams free bids to tournaments and have USAU pay it, right? So let's say 8 teams, get in for free. They would have paid a $500 bid. So that's $4,000 that USAU pays. But what do they get out of it? Well, they get observers and clinics and youth coaches and all of these other things that are going to, in 5 years, lead to significantly higher USA Ultimate memberships, more sport growth, and then just more money available in the sport. So, honest to God,
the real question is, Charlie,
I don't even think it's a meme. I don't think it's a meme. I think it's an amazing idea that needs to be explored at a high level by USA Ultimate. Charlie,
can people subscribe to Ultiworld with Ultibucks?
Well, we could make that an option.
There you go. That's word from on high.
I mean, maybe we should make Ultibucks. Let's make our own cryptocurrency.
What could go wrong?
Doesn't seem like much, to be honest. All right. Well, that is going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Join us for our subscriber bonus segment. We're going to be talking about the Dallas Roughnecks flying players to games on a private jet. That's happening. That's a real thing. It happens
with real bucks, real American dollars. You cannot
pay for that with Ultibucks. I do not believe. Not yet. So we're going to talk about that. I hope you'll join us there. You can subscribe to Ultiworld for less than $4 a month at ultiworld.com/subscribe. Great to have Keith back. Great to have you here listening with us. We'll talk to you next week.